Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human research and written material. So, imagine you are the CEO of a massive, multi-billion-dollar multinational venture.
Right.
You've got thousands of employees, the sprawling logistical supply chain, and literally everything is on the line.
Okay.
But your top performer, the absolute rainmaker of your entire organization, hates you so much that he just locks himself in his office and watches the company bleed money.
Just actively letting it crash and burn.
Exactly. Heading straight for bankruptcy, just to prove a point.
Right.
And, that level of petty, radioactive, world-destroying ego, it's not a new phenomenon. It's actually the exact plot of a 3,000-year-old poem.
It really is, yeah.
Today, we're doing a deep dive into the foundation of Western literature. We're looking at Homer's Iliad, specifically the first three books, using that majestic translation by Alexander Pope. And we aren't doing some dry history lesson today.
No, definitely not.
We are stripping away the heavy bronze armor to expose the raw human psychology underneath. Okay, let's unpack this because it is staggering how a story about a besieged city in the ancient Mediterranean reads like a transcript of a modern corporate meltdown or like a political crisis.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that the setting might be these dusty plains of ancient Troy, with spears and chariots and all of that. But the true battlefield in these opening books is the human ego.
Oh, absolutely.
The most devastating wounds we're going to see today aren't inflicted by bronze weapons. They're inflicted by bruised pride, deep-seated insecurity, and this just desperate, insatiable need for status validation.
It's like a master class in the anatomy of a crisis, right?
But it really is. And to grasp how this crisis detonates, we have to look at the pressure cooker these people are trapped in. So the Greek coalition Homer often calls them the Achaeans or the Argives or Denians, which were just regional names. They've been camped on the shores of Troy for 9 grueling years.
9 years on a beach, and they haven't just been sitting around playing dice. To sustain an army of tens of thousands of men, they've been systematically raiding and sacking the local towns all around the area.
It's a brutal logistical reality. You have to feed these people.
Right, exactly. So during one of these raids, the supreme commander of the Greek forces, Agamemnon, he takes a beautiful captive named Chryseis as his prize. And his greatest warrior, Achilles, takes another captive named Briseis.
Right, which sets up the whole inciting incident.
Yeah. So Chryseis, who is a priest of the god Apollo and crucially the father of Agamemnon's captive, walks right into this heavily armed Greek camp.
It's a huge risk.
He brings a ransom, he's carrying the sacred symbols of his god, and he essentially just begs Agamemnon to return his daughter.
It's a moment of just profound vulnerability, if you think about it. You have this old, unarmed man surrounded by hostile, bloodthirsty warriors just asking for his child back.
Yeah.
And the crazy thing is, the army actually supports it. The text tells us the ranks of soldiers shout out in agreement, like, respect the priest, take the ransom.
Take the money, give the girl back. Easy.
Yeah, right. But Agamemnon doesn't just refuse. He exerts his authority in the most cruel, insolent way possible. He actually threatens the old man.
Oh, brutal.
Alexander Pope translates Agamemnon's sneer so beautifully here. He says, "Till time shall rifle every youthful grace, and age dismiss her from my cold embrace, in daily labors of the loom employed, or doomed to deck the bed she once enjoyed."
Wow.
He is basically saying, get out of here before I kill you. Your daughter's going to grow old in my bed thousands of miles away in Greece.
It's just an astonishing display of arrogance. He completely ignores the religious and diplomatic norms of his own culture.
Completely. And that arrogance, it has an immediate, terrifying cost.
Right, because Chryseis walks away, totally heartbroken, walking along the shore of the roaring sea, and he prays to Apollo for vengeance. And Apollo does not hesitate.
Not even a little bit.
Homer describes the god coming down from Olympus like night itself. His silver bow is twanging, and he's shooting these invisible arrows of disease directly into the Greek camp.
Pope's translation is so visceral here. And hissing fly the feathered fates below.
It's so good. And the plague starts with the animals first, right? First the mules drop dead, then the dogs, and finally the men start dying in droves.
Yeah, for 9 days, these funeral pyres are just burning continuously. The air is thick with smoke, the smell of death.
And during all of this, Agamemnon, the commander-in-chief, what does he do? Absolutely nothing. He sits on his hands while his men die.
Well, yeah, because addressing the plague means admitting that he caused it, right? It means relinquishing his prize, admitting fault. So this massive leadership vacuum forces Achilles to step up. Now, Achilles isn't the supreme commander. He's more like the star athlete, the primary weapon of the Achaeans.
The rainmaker.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So he calls a general assembly and brings in the prophet Chalcas to explain why Apollo is just slaughtering them.
And Chalcas is terrified, right?
Yeah.
He essentially looks around and says, look, I know exactly why this is happening, but if I say it out loud, the most powerful man in this room is going to literally kill me.
Yeah, Achilles has to swear an oath just to protect the prophet. He says, nobody will lay a hand on you, not even Agamemnon.
So Chalcas points the finger directly at the commander. He exposes Agamemnon's disrespect to the priest, and Agamemnon just completely loses his mind.
Oh, he goes ballistic.
The text says his eyes are flashing with fire. He finally, reluctantly, agrees to give Chryseis back to stop the plague, but his ego just cannot handle the public loss of status.
Right. He has to win somehow.
Right. So he turns to Achilles and says, look, if I have to give up my prize, I'm taking yours. I'm taking Chryseis. And this just ignites a relationship-destroying, system-collapsing argument.
Yeah, and to really understand why this specific argument escalates to the point of destroying the entire Greek war effort, we have to unpack the deep historical and psychological context of this Bronze Age world.
Okay, yeah.
We're looking at a very rigid honor-shame culture. In the ancient Greek mindset, a warrior's physical prize, the Greek word is geros. It isn't just about the monetary value or the aesthetic appeal of the object, or in this case, the person. It represents his intrinsic worth, his honor, his time. Like, in a world before digital bank accounts, before LinkedIn profiles or Forbes lists, your physical spoils of war are your resume.
That makes so much sense.
They are the public, tangible measurement of your status in the eyes of your peers.
So when Agamemnon threatens to take Chryseis, it's not just petty theft. It is a very public emasculation.
Exactly.
He's effectively deleting Achilles' entire professional identity in front of the board of directors. He's saying, I have the structural power to erase your value, no matter how hard you fight on the battlefield.
Precisely. And, you know, this highlights a deeply uncomfortable reality in the text that I think we really have to confront head on here.
Yeah, absolutely.
We are talking about Chryseis and Briseis as prizes. I mean, these are human beings. These are women who have just watched their families be slaughtered, and now they are being treated as literal property, bargaining chips, and status symbols for violent men.
It's horrifying to a modern sensibility.
It really is. And we, of course, fundamentally reject the ancient social assumption of women as spoils of war. But if we look past the ancient context to the underlying psychological mechanism at play, we see a dangerous human tendency that is very much alive today.
Right.
Humans will objectify anything. A person, a job title, a corner office, a budget allocation, a reserved parking space, and turn it into a proxy for their own ego.
So true.
Yeah.
Like, Agamemnon doesn't care about Chryseis as a human being. Honestly, he probably doesn't even care about her that much as a captive.
Probably not.
What he cares about is what losing her says about his dominance.
Yeah.
And we do this all the time. We fight viciously over like a minor procedural change at work, not because the procedure actually matters, but because yielding feels like losing status.
Right. We use these objectified proxies to rationalize our greed and punish our rivals.
And that leads directly to the core wisdom here, which is the devastating ripple effect of a leader's unchecked pride. Homer, through Pope's translation, makes the causality undeniable. He writes, "The king of men his reverent priest defied, and for the king's offense the people died."
Wow.
The ego of the powerful always inflicts immense collateral damage on the vulnerable. Agamemnon's inability to admit a mistake, his total refusal to show basic human empathy to a grieving father, it literally results in his own soldiers burning on funeral pyres.
He prioritizes his personal sense of authority over the actual lives of the men he is supposed to protect.
Which is just awful leadership. But wait, hold on. I have to challenge Achilles' reaction here too, because he is usually framed as the great hero who gets wronged in this situation.
Yeah.
When Agamemnon pushes him, Achilles is so enraged he physically reaches for his sword.
Yeah.
He's about to murder the supreme commander in front of the entire army. He is half a second away from a military coup.
He really is.
And then the goddess Minerva Athena, the goddess of wisdom and strategic reason, she appears only to him. She actually pulls him by his hair and tells him to sheath his sword. She says, use words to sting him, but don't kill him, because eventually you'll get 3 times the wealth and apologies.
Right. She de-escalates the immediate physical violence.
Right. So Achilles puts the sword away.
Yeah.
But is he really practicing self-control here? Because deciding to go sit in his tent, withhold his fighting skills, and intentionally watch his friends and colleagues be slaughtered by the Trojans just to vindicate his own pride, I mean, that feels infinitely more insidious and petty than just swinging the sword. He actively prays for his own team to lose.
It is a profound failure of moral restraint. I mean, you're absolutely right. Achilles possesses physical restraint in that split second. He obeys the goddess by not committing murder. But his withdrawal is a calculated, devastating strike against his own people. By taking his troops, the Myrmidons, out of the fight, he is allowing the plague of the Trojan army to consume the Greeks, which perfectly mirrors exactly how Agamemnon allowed Apollo's plague to consume them.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that parallel.
Yeah, they are locked in this death spiral of toxic leadership. Achilles' restraint is entirely self-serving. It's just about maximizing Agamemnon's future regret, completely regardless of the body count.
And this is where we really have to look in the mirror as listeners today. When a boss, a colleague, or a system insults your pride, how do you react?
Right?
Do you withdraw your talents? Do you, take your ball and go home, letting the project, the team, or even your family suffer just to prove how indispensable you are?
It's such a common reaction.
It really is. It's asking yourself, am I letting my team die on the battlefield just so leadership looks incompetent? The desire for personal vindication can so easily override our commitment to the collective good.
And, the consequences of Achilles' withdrawal just ripple outward, completely destabilizing the entire Greek army. Because Achilles asks his mother, the sea nymph Thetis, to intercede with Jupiter Jove to punish the Greeks, Jove decides to set a psychological trap.
Oh, this part is wild.
It is. He sends the deceitful dream down to Agamemnon. And the dream takes the form of wise old Nestor, who is a counselor Agamemnon deeply respects, and it whispers in his ear while he sleeps. It tells him that today is the day he will conquer Troy, that the gods have finally turned fully in his favor.
It's like an ancient echo chamber. It's like an algorithm feeding an insecure CEO exactly the metrics he wants to see just to confirm his own biases.
Exactly.
Achilles leaving creates this massive vacuum of competence, and instead of facing that terrifying reality, Agamemnon just retreats into delusion. So he wakes up vibrating with overconfidence. He literally thinks he's going to end a 10-year war by lunchtime.
Yeah.
But then he does something so baffling, so utterly bizarre, that it nearly destroys the entire expedition. He calls the army together, but instead of giving them a rousing, Braveheart-style motivational speech, he decides to test their loyalty with reverse psychology.
It is a catastrophic miscalculation.
He stands up in front of tens of thousands of exhausted, traumatized men and says, "You know what? We've been here 9 years. The ship's timbers are rotting. The rigging is falling apart. Jove has clearly tricked us. This whole war is a failure. Let's just pack up and go home."
Yeah, and in his warped, ego-driven mind, he fully expects the men to erupt in protest, to shout, "No, sire, we will stay and fight for your honor. Lead us to blood."
Right, but they don't.
He is operating from the total isolation of his own delusion, entirely disconnected from the psychological reality of his frontline workers. He assumes they share his obsession with his personal glory. But they don't care about his glory.
Not at all.
They are tired, they miss their wives, they miss their children. They are sick of watching their friends die for a woman they've never even met.
So they don't argue. They don't rally. They stampede.
Yeah.
They literally stampede for the ships.
It's just absolute chaos.
Pope describes the dust rising to the skies in these massive clouds, the deafening clamor as men start frantically dragging the heavy wooden boats down into the surf. They are literally clearing the launch trenches. 9 years of exhausted soldiers are offered an out by their CEO, and they take it instantly.
It perfectly exposes the sheer fragility of group morale. As a leader, if you are years into a grueling, demoralizing project, you cannot play games with your team's resolve.
Yeah.
The stampede is so violent, so sudden, that it threatens to override fate itself. The narrative implies the Greeks would have gone home prematurely, ruining the whole cosmic plan if the gods hadn't intervened. So the goddess Juno sends Minerva down to find Ulysses Odysseus, the most cunning of the Greeks.
And Ulysses has to act as the ultimate crisis manager here. He drops his own cloak, grabs Agamemnon's heavy golden scepter, which is the physical symbol of absolute state authority, and he just runs into the mob. And he uses different tactics depending on who he encounters, which is fascinating. When he sees a king or a captain, he uses gentle persuasion, saying, "Calm down. You didn't understand the king's true meaning. He's just testing us."
He speaks to them as peers.
Exactly. But when he sees a regular soldier, a commoner, shouting and running for the ships, he physically strikes them with the scepter and screams at them to sit down and obey their betters. He physically and verbally herds them back into the assembly area.
It's a brutal, very physical restoration of order. And once he finally gets everyone seated, the assembly is dead silent, just trembling with fear and confusion, except for one man.
Yes.
And this introduces one of the most fascinating, disruptive characters in all of ancient literature, Thersites.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Thersites is incredible. Homer describes him in incredibly harsh terms. He's ugly, he's squint-eyed, he limps, his shoulders are hunched over his chest, his head is misshapen with sparse hair.
He is aesthetically repulsive to the ancient Greek ideal of beauty.
Right. He's the guy everyone in the camp finds intensely annoying.
Yeah.
But in this dead silence, Thersites stands up and starts screaming at Agamemnon. And Pope translates his venom so perfectly. He says, "With all the wealth our wars and blood bestow, thy tents are crowded and thy chests o'erflow."
He's going right for the throat.
He points right at the Supreme Commander and says, "Why are we still here? Are we just here to fill your pockets with gold and your bed with captive women while we do the bleeding? You are a tyrant."
He publicly accuses Agamemnon of hoarding the spoils and abandoning the men.
And here's the thing. Thersites is telling the absolute 100% truth. He accuses Agamemnon of being a greedy tyrant driven by pride. That is exactly what Achilles said in Book 1.
Word for word, almost.
Achilles said it, and he is treated as a tragic hero defending his honor. Thersites says the exact same truth, and what happens? Ulysses marches over to him, berates him, calls him the lowest, vilest scum in the army, and then severely beats him over the back and shoulders with the heavy golden scepter.
It's a vicious beating.
The Thersites welts up, bleeds, sits down crying, and the entire Greek army, the very men he was just advocating for, they laugh and cheer at his pain. Why? Why is the truth celebrated when it comes from a demigod, but brutally punished when it comes from an ugly commoner?
Because here, you are bumping right up against Homer's deeply aristocratic worldview. In this society, truth is entirely dependent on status. It's about who is allowed to speak truth to power.
Wow. Okay.
Achilles has the aristocratic rank, right? He has a goddess for a mother. He has unparalleled physical beauty and martial prowess. When Achilles critiques the system, it is viewed as a constitutional crisis among elites.
Right, there's a board-level dispute.
Exactly. Thersites, on the other hand, lacks the status, the pedigree, and the physical beauty. And in the ancient aesthetic, external ugliness was very often equated with internal baseness. When Thersites critiques the system, it isn't seen as valid dissent. It is framed as sedition, mutiny, and just an upending of the natural order.
It's tone policing in its most violent, ancient form. But if we pull that into the modern world, it holds up a very uncomfortable mirror to our own corporate, political, or social echo chambers.
Oh, absolutely.
How often do we dismiss entirely valid, urgent critiques just because we don't like the messenger? We shoot the messenger because they don't have the scepter of authority, or because their tone is abrasive, or because they're at the bottom of the organizational chart. We completely ignore the systemic rot they're pointing out because we are too busy being annoyed by how they brought it up.
It really forces us to ask, who is the Thersites in your life? Who is the abrasive, unpolished, maybe even deeply annoying person who is actually telling the uncomfortable truth everyone else is too cowardly to voice?
That's a tough question to sit with.
It is. The challenge is learning to separate the message from the messenger. Can you force yourself to listen to the substance of a complaint, even when the delivery makes you cringe?
And at the same time, we have to look at Ulysses' actions critically here. We cannot blindly endorse a leader beating a dissenting worker with a literal rod of state power to silence him.
No, of course not.
That violates every modern value we hold about psychological safety and free speech. But Homer includes it to show the grim reality of restoring order. The army was dissolving into chaos. Ulysses uses authoritarian violence to forge a fractured, panicked community back into a singular weapon. It's a very dark look at how power maintains control during an existential crisis.
Exactly. Order is restored, but at the cost of the only voice speaking truth to power. So, with the men back in line, they wipe away their tears, they eat, and they finally prepare for battle. The wise advisor Nestor suggests to Agamemnon that they divide the men by tribes and nations.
Okay, why does he suggest that?
Well, that way, leadership can see exactly which units are fighting bravely and which are hanging back. And this organizational strategy ushers in a section of the epic that modern readers often find incredibly tedious, but which is foundational to the text, the catalog of ships.
Yes, the catalog. But before Homer even begins this massive list, Ulysses reminds the army of an omen they witnessed 9 years ago at a place called Aulis, right before they set sail for Troy.
Right, the snake and the birds.
Yeah, they were offering sacrifices under a plane tree, and this terrifying serpent, a snake with a blood-red back, slithers out from beneath the altar, goes up the tree, and devours 8 baby birds in a nest, followed by the mother bird. 9 birds in total. After eating them, Jove turns the snake to stone. And the prophet Chalcus interpreted this to mean they would fight a bitter war for 9 long years and finally take the city of Troy in the 10th.
And Ulysses resurrects this memory to anchor them. The reverse psychology trick almost broke them, so he has to remind them of the divine promise that initiated this entire geopolitical endeavor.
Right, they need a reason to stay.
The gods promised victory in year 10. They are in year 10. Then Homer takes a deep breath, invokes the muses, asking for divine memory, because no human could remember all this, and begins this overwhelming, relentless roster of the Greek forces. He lists the kings, their hometowns, the regional geography, and the exact number of ships they brought, followed by a similar, though shorter, catalog of the Trojan defenders.
I remember reading this for the first time and thinking, why is Homer spending pages upon pages just listing names and places? The hardy warriors whom Boeotia bred, those who in Pedion or Elysian dwell. It just goes on and on. It feels like reading a phone book from the Bronze Age.
It really does feel that way to us, but we must understand what this meant to the original audience. When this epic was being sung around a fire or at a festival in ancient Greece, this catalog was a living memorial.
Oh, interesting.
It was an oral map of their entire known world. It was a historical record of their ancestors. Imagine sitting in the audience and the bard names your specific hometown, your supposed forefather, who brought 40 black ships to the Great War. It connects the local, everyday listener to the mythic, heroic past.
It's like reading the names on a modern war memorial. Every single name is an entire universe to somebody.
Precisely. And structurally, it emphasizes the terrifying scale of this conflict. This isn't just a border skirmish between 2 little towns. This is a massive mobilization pulling resources, timber, food, and human blood from every corner of the agency.
The modern equivalent that always comes to mind for me is looking at the staggering complexity of global supply chains or the sheer volume of a multinational workforce.
Yeah, that's a great comparison.
When a CEO like Agamemnon makes a decision to go to war or, to launch a hostile takeover or to open a new market, it's so easy to view it as just an abstract boardroom maneuver. But the catalog of ships forces the camera to zoom out and show the brutal logistics. Beneath every grand executive vision are thousands of individual human lives, hometowns, and families mobilized to execute it.
Real people.
Right. 50 ships from Athens, 80 ships from Crete, each carrying 100 men who have mothers, wives, and children waiting for them. It humanizes the sheer weight of the commitment.
It really does. It is the psychological weight of a decade-long commitment. And this brings us to a profound shadow side of the Greeks' resolve. When Ulysses reminds them of the snake and the 9 birds, he is utilizing the momentum of their past vows to keep them moving forward. But you could easily argue that the Greeks are completely trapped by the sunk cost fallacy.
Oh, absolutely. They are totally trapped. They have suffered for 9 years. They have buried thousands of their friends on a foreign beach. They feel like they have to stay for the 10th year, not necessarily because taking Troy is still a sound strategic or moral goal, but because if they pack up and sail away now, the last 9 years of suffering, all those dead men mean absolutely nothing.
It's terrifying to admit that.
The psychological devastation of admitting that it was all for nothing is worse than dying in battle for them. They're basically held hostage by the ghosts of the men they've already buried.
It's a paralyzing dynamic. You see it in failing businesses, you see it in disastrous political campaigns, and you see it in toxic relationships all the time.
Yes. Think about a bad marriage or a startup that has been burning cash for 10 years without ever turning a profit. You have to ask, are you pursuing this goal because it still holds intrinsic value, because it aligns with your purpose today? Or are you simply staying the course because you've already invested a decade of your life, thousands of dollars, and immense emotional energy into it?
Letting go is incredibly hard.
It takes staggering courage to walk away from a sunk cost, to look at the rotting ships and say, we made a mistake, let's go home. And the Greeks just couldn't do it.
And because they can't walk away, the massive armies, which were just meticulously detailed in the catalog, finally march out to meet each other on the dusty plain between the ships and the walls of Troy. And here, Homer does something structurally brilliant. We've just experienced this massive macro-scale view of geopolitical mobilization. Now, as the armies close the distance, the narrative camera zooms all the way in to the micro-level cause of all this suffering. We finally meet the architects of the mess, Paris and Helen.
We finally see the guy who started it all.
Yes, Paris.
The dust is swirling, the bronze armor is flashing, the tension is just unbearable, and out strides Paris. He's the Trojan prince who went to Greece as a guest and absconded with Helen, the wife of his host, King Menelaus. And how does this guy present himself on a battlefield?
Oh, it's so dramatic.
He strides out between the two massive armies, wearing a panther skin draped over his shoulders, holding a curved bow and a sword, looking like an absolute rock star. He challenges the bravest of the Greeks to single combat. But the very second Menelaus, the man whose life he ruined, steps out of the Greek ranks, glaring like a hungry lion, Paris's bravado evaporates instantly.
It just vanishes.
The text says he turns pale, his knees shake, and he retreats back into the Trojan ranks, like a man walking through a forest who nearly steps on a poisonous snake. He completely cowers.
It is a pathetic, deeply humiliating display, and his older brother, Hector, who is the greatest Trojan hero, the man who actually bears the physical and emotional weight of defending the city, does not let him get away with it.
Hector is so angry.
He ruthlessly dissects his brother's character. He says, "Unhappy Paris, but to women brave, so fairly formed, and only to deceive." Hector is basically calling him a beautiful, hollow shell. He tells him that his magnificent hair, his good looks, and his skill at playing the lyre won't save him when his face is being ground into the bloody dust. Hector exposes the massive gap between Paris's aesthetic presentation and his internal courage.
Paris is the ancient equivalent of a TikTok influencer or a PR-spun CEO who looks fantastic on a magazine cover.
Perfect analogy, yeah.
He has incredible personal branding. He wears a panther skin. He projects this aura of dangerous beauty. But the second the actual market crashes, the second he has to face a hostile takeover, or in this case, a raging, heavily armed Menelaus, he just shrinks. He wants all the rewards of bold action. He wants to steal the beautiful queen without paying any of the costs or facing any of the consequences.
Exactly.
So shamed by Hector's stinging critique, Paris finally reluctantly agrees to a one-on-one duel with Menelaus to decide the war. The winner gets Helen and the treasure, the loser dies, and everyone else goes home in peace.
And while the armies are pausing to set up the religious oaths for this duel, Homer shifts the perspective again, using a brilliant cinematic technique called the tachyscopia, which literally translates to the view from the wall. He pauses the action on the battlefield and takes us up to the massive Scaean gates of Troy, where the elderly statesmen of the city are gathered. And the goddess Iris fetches Helen from her weaving and brings her up to the wall.
And this scene is breathtaking. The old men of Troy, men whose actual sons are bleeding and dying on the plain below, they see Helen walking toward them. And instead of cursing her, they whisper to each other. They say, "No wonder such celestial charms, for 9 long years have set the world in arms."
It's amazing. They just accept it.
They recognize that her beauty is so absolute, it operates almost like a force of nature. It provides a terrifying, valid justification for all the carnage. And King Priam, Paris's father, treats her with immense grace. He calls her "my child." He tells her, "I don't blame you for this war. I blame the gods who brought these tears upon us."
This is a moment where we must grapple with the immense complexity of Helen's character. In ancient literature, women are often reduced to passive objects, but Helen is profoundly, agonizingly self-aware here.
She really is.
When Priam speaks kindly to her, absolving her of guilt, she doesn't accept the comfort. She responds with deep self-loathing. She says, "Ugh, had I died, ere to these walls I fled, false to my country in my nuptial bed?" Priam asks her to identify the Greek heroes down on the plain Agamemnon, Ulysses, Ajax, and as she names the men she used to know, you can feel the crushing weight of her isolation.
That's so tragic.
She is simultaneously a victim of divine machinations. Aphrodite promised her to Paris, remember? And a deeply aware agent of her own tragedy. She recognizes the apocalyptic devastation she has caused, even if the men around her are willing to excuse it.
Try to imagine the psychological burden of being the human epicenter of a world war.
I can't even fathom it.
You are standing on a stone wall, looking down at tens of thousands of men, bleeding, screaming, and dying, and yet with absolute certainty that they are there because of a choice you made or a choice the gods made for you. It's unfathomable. And the contrast between her depth of feeling and Paris's shallowness is staggering. Helen feels the weight of every single death. Paris just wants to look good in his panther skin.
And that contrast completely defines the duel that finally takes place. So the armies swear solemn oaths. They slit the throats of lambs and pour out wine, praying that whoever breaks the truce will have their brains poured out on the ground, just like the wine.
It's very graphic.
Very serious stuff.
Wow.
The space is measured, the lots are drawn. Paris throws his spear first, but it hits Menelaus' shield, and the bronze point just bends. Menelaus prays to Jove for justice, hurls his spear, and it rips right through Paris' shield and through his tunic, but Paris twists away just in time to avoid death.
Then Menelaus closes the distance. He draws his heavy sword, raises it high, and smashes it down directly onto the ridge of Paris' helmet. And the sword shatters into 3 or 4 pieces.
It just explodes.
Menelaus is looking at his empty hand in disbelief. He is so furious at the gods that he just lunges forward barehanded. He grabs Paris by the thick horsehair crest of his helmet, twists it, and starts physically dragging him toward the Greek lines. The embroidered leather strap under Paris' chin is cutting into his throat. He is literally choking to death while being dragged through the dirt.
Menelaus is seconds away from snapping Paris' neck. The 10-year war is about to end in justice. The wronged husband has defeated the thief. But then, divine intervention entirely upends reality.
Of course it does.
Venus Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty, who is Paris' patron, she intervenes. Unseen by the screaming armies, she swoops down and snaps that thick leather helmet strap, leaving Menelaus holding nothing but an empty helmet. She then wraps Paris in a dense, impenetrable cloud of mist, teleports him completely off the battlefield, and drops him safely, unhurt, in his own perfumed, luxurious bedroom inside the palace.
It is the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. The contrast is jarring, from choking on dust and blood to landing softly in a perfumed bed.
To understand this, we really have to understand how Homer uses the gods. The gods in the Iliad are not moral compasses. They often represent amplified, externalized versions of the internal drives and defining characteristics of the mortals they favor.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. Venus represents lust, aesthetic beauty, comfort, and the avoidance of pain. So when the reality of his actions finally catches up to him, when Paris is choking on the consequences, he doesn't face them. He is rescued by his defining flaw. His preference for pleasure and comfort over duty and honor literally swoops in, cloaks him in mist, and removes him from reality.
So what does this all mean? Venus teleporting Paris to his bedroom is the ultimate ancient metaphor for running away from your problems, the avoidance of pain, and what happens next is just infuriating.
It really is.
Venus goes to the wall, finds Helen, and forces her to go to Paris' bedroom. Helen is disgusted. She knows Paris just lost. She walks into the room, sits down, turns her eyes away from him, and absolutely verbally eviscerates him. She says, "You said you were a better warrior than Menelaus. Why don't you go back out there and challenge him again?"
Yeah.
"Oh, wait, don't, because he will kill you."
And how does Paris respond to his wife's justified contempt?
He brushes it off. He essentially says, "Hey, don't speak to me so harshly. Menelaus won today because Minerva helped them. Maybe I'll win next time. But right now, let's just go to bed. I haven't desired you this much since the day I first sailed away with you."
It's unbelievable.
He is utterly insulated by his privilege and his psychological mist. He replaces the harsh, humiliating reality of defeat with the immediate gratification of physical pleasure. He is completely disconnected from the fact that outside his window, men are dying in the dirt for his mistakes. Meanwhile, Book 3 ends with Menelaus raging around the battlefield like a wild animal, looking for Paris everywhere, and Agamemnon declaring that since Paris vanished, the Greeks have technically won the duel, demanding Helen and the treasure back.
Paris uses the mist to escape accountability, and that is the urgent translation for a listener today. We all have a Venus that swoops in to rescue us when we are about to face the painful, choking consequences of our actions. It might be alcohol, it might be numbing out by binge-watching television for 6 hours, it might be a habit of making elaborate, victimizing excuses, or for some, it is relying on sheer wealth, social status, or a corporate safety net to shield them from accountability.
What is the cloud of mist you use to escape? Think about it. When you make a massive mistake at work, or you deeply hurt someone in a relationship, and you feel that terrifying, choking sensation of guilt and public exposure, do you let yourself sit in that intense discomfort? Do you face the Menelaus you have wronged and make amends?
That's the real test.
Or do you call upon your Venus to whisk you away to a comfortable, perfumed psychological bedroom where you can distract yourself and pretend it didn't happen? The practice of maturity is learning to stay in the arena when you fail, rather than retreating into the mist.
That is incredibly challenging, but it is the foundation of integrity. If we synthesize the vast landscape we've covered today, from Agamemnon's fragile, destructive pride to Achilles' stubborn, passive-aggressive withdrawal, from Thersites' brutal truth-telling to the massive logistical weight of the catalog of ships, all the way to Paris's cowardly evasion, these opening chapters of the Iliad reveal something profound.
They really do.
They show us that the greatest threats to human flourishing, the real destroyers of cities, careers, and communities, aren't just opposing armies with spears. The greatest threats are the unmanaged, unrecognized flaws within our own characters. The ego, the unchecked pride, the fear of shame, the refusal to accept accountability. These are the forces that level Troy.
It is a mirror held up to human nature.
Yeah.
And the reflection hasn't changed a single degree in 3,000 years.
It truly hasn't. And I want to leave you with one final provocative thought to mull over, something that requires your own exploration. Notice how, throughout these opening books, human beings are constantly trying to bind the terrifying chaos of the world with external structures. They make solemn pacts, they swear blood oaths, they sacrifice lambs to the gods, they establish strict rules for the duel between Menelaus and Paris. It was supposed to be a legally and spiritually binding resolution to the war. Yet every single time humans make these external guarantees, the chaotic forces of the universe represented by the gods completely ignore them or blow them to the wind. Venus breaks the sacred truce without a second thought to save her favorite prince.
That's a great point. The rules just don't hold up.
Exactly. It begs a vital question for our own lives. Are we relying too heavily on external guarantees to save us from chaos? Are we trusting entirely in legal systems, contracts, the assumption of fairness, or sheer luck to protect us? If the external rules can be broken at any moment by forces completely beyond our control, then true stability, true resilience must come from our own internal integrity. The only thing you can truly control on the chaotic battlefield of life is whether you choose to be a Paris, hiding in the midst of your own excuses, or an Achilles, learning, however painfully, to master the devastating power of your own rage.
That's the heart of this section. This is Wisdom for the Present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.